It's This American Life. I'm Ira Glass. Today's program, but I did everything right. Stories where people do what they have been told is best, they do what they think is right, and it doesn't come out the way they thought. We have arrived at Act 2 of our program, Act 2, Brian and Peg. So when we started to put together today's program about trying to do everything right and where that leads, I remember this conversation that I had this past May with two people, Brian and Peg, who had tried to do everything right. The day I met them was also the day that I learned about this disagreement they have. This was in an outdoor amphitheater in a public park in Queens. So, Brian, can I record you for a little bit as you're, organizing things? Is that okay?
Just understand that I'm not very organized.
That day, Brian Walter and a bunch of other volunteers were setting up a local memorial event for people who had died of COVID in Queens, in New York, which was especially hard hit by the pandemic early on. The memorial was Brian's idea, to have an event where portraits of Queens residents who died of COVID would be placed on empty chairs in this amphitheater. The people who loved them would gather around. There were speeches remembering those who passed.
When we first came up with this idea, we did not imagine the scope of what it is today. We thought there was just going to be a few of us in the park with a few benches, maybe 20 or 30 of us.
How quickly did it grow?
It took off. All the tickets were gone in 25 minutes. Yep, 200 tickets.
Yeah. And
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to bother you one more time. If we can just raise
an
it.
energetic, gray-haired woman interrupts us. That's Peg.
But if you can just raise it, it would
I
help.
have to do manual labor now.
But get that done first.
Mom's always the boss. No
Is
matter
that your
what
mom?
she do. Yes, that's my mother.
What's been your role in organizing this?
What's been my role? Oh, it's a good question. I kind of helped Brian flesh out his ideas. We discussed / argued over many things. Why don't you try this? I don't know if that's going to work. Why don't we do it this way? Back and forth. I guess in some ways I'm the more practical person.
Peg's practical experience running things includes 30 years as director of religious education for a couple of Catholic churches, supervising over 20 teachers, hundreds of kids. Her husband, John, Brian's dad, got COVID right at the beginning, April 2020, and he died a few weeks later.
And of course, he's right over there today and right here.
Oh, right here, right up front.
Yes, my husband of 57 years.
Wow.
So that's him. Yeah.
In the portrait, he's wearing a New York Mets hat and a plaid shirt.
So, it's been very difficult. It's one of those things that you just have to take baby steps to get over.
Which brings me to the thing this story is actually about, this disagreement she has with her son, Brian. Brian has told other reporters, and he's told me, that he was racked with guilt with the knowledge that he gave his dad COVID. Brian lives in the apartment upstairs from his parents in kind of a traditional Queens two-family house. And when COVID happened, he would go out each day to his job at the MTA. He would ride in the subway. He would work in the tunnels with other people. And he believes he brought home the virus to his dad. Peg is certain he's wrong, that her husband John did not get COVID from Brian. In fact, it was the other way around. John got sick first. And Brian?
Okay, Brian got sick. I am positive that he got it the night that he took John to the hospital. From sitting next to John, well, first of all, he had to help his father down the stairs into the car. And then he sat in the car and drove him first to the urgent care and then into Manhattan to Mount Sinai.
And you think that's when Brian got
I'm
it?
sure that's how Brian came down with it, because 3 days later, he tested positive. And he had not been sick the whole time. And even though he lived upstairs from us in an apartment upstairs, he used to come home from work, go upstairs, and sometimes John would say, he didn't even stop in to say hello. And I said, I know that. He's taking a shower. He'll be down in a few minutes. And he'd come down with mask on, with gloves. He was being super careful. And I really don't think that he got it any other way but from John. And I don't know how John or I got COVID. And believe me, I've stayed awake long enough at night trying to figure it out.
But Brian worries that he gave it to his dad.
He worries he did, but I'm positive he didn't. I'm sorry.
No.
I talk with my hands and I keep hitting your mic. I'm sorry.
That's interesting, though, that he's chosen to believe that he's to blame.
I know that, but I'm positive that he's not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm positive that he's not. Because for John to have been that sick to go in the hospital, he must have gotten it days and days earlier. And then why wasn't Brian sick until after John went to the hospital?
Why do you think he thinks that he gave it to her?
I just think that's the way he is, that he feels he gave it to him.
It's funny, I've heard about people who blame themselves. It's almost like it gives him more control of the situation if he thinks he was to blame. It wasn't just like a bolt of lightning or something hitting him.
It could be. I don't know.
Of course, so many families are in this situation, wondering how somebody they love got COVID. Why did Brian choose to believe this about his dad? Why wasn't he convinced by his mom? He was too busy that particular day to have a real conversation with me about the whole thing, but I dropped by his house later. His dad, John, was a history buff and a Civil War expert and researcher, and by the doorbell, there's an example of John's sense of humor. There's a bronze plaque that reads, "On this site in 1897, nothing happened." Brian told me back when his dad first died, he felt so guilty. Since he got COVID too, he says, it really hit home what his dad must have gone through to have a case that was even worse than his. And he says he thought about it all the time. How would he let this happen to his dad? And what made it especially hard? They were doing everything right, being as careful as they knew how.
We thought we were doing everything correct. I mean, everything that the CDC said. I mean, my mom watches CNN on a good day. She was watching it double during that time. And everything they said, we would wipe everything down. We had bleach outside. We had wipes outside. We had everything. And yet he still got it.
Remember March 2020, when all this was so new and we were figuring out how to deal with it?
And I was the one who was shopping for the family, and I would separate their groceries. We had a grocery drop-off procedure, and we discussed it at length about how we were going to do this through text messages. We had meetings where I would be at the top of the stairs and they would be at the bottom, and we'd go through about, I'm going to drop this stuff off for you. I'm going to leave it there. Do not come out until I tell you that I'm upstairs. And that's what we did. And then they would come out. My mother would come out and she would wipe everything down. And we had a whole decontamination station set up in the front of the house. I did the whole gloves in the store and not touching the phone. And I even had in my car a bottle of water and a container of soap that more than once I would just wash my hands in the parking lot before coming home. And, you know, we thought we were doing everything correct.
So when you picture giving it to your dad, like, what's the scenario that runs through your head?
You don't know what happened. I mean, I can tell you that my dad didn't leave the house and I was the only one going out. You know, so mom couldn't have given it to him. My kids didn't see him, so they couldn't have given it to him. So I was the only kind of link at that point. So, of course, it had to have come from me. How else did he get it?
Oh, wait, I hadn't put that together. You're the only one in the whole house who's coming in and out?
Yeah. For since St. Patrick's Day, since even before St. Patrick's Day.
Again, it's 2020, very beginning of the lockdown.
My parents did not leave this house since the beginning of March, and I was the only one coming in and out.
So you're the only contact with the outside world.
Yep. Yeah.
So if the virus got to him at all, you were the only one who could have brought it in.
Right. That's why I keep thinking that. Yeah. Because I'm the only one going out.
I gotta say, it's really hard to see any way around that. Brian knows all of his mom's arguments that when you look at the dates, that Brian started showing symptoms after his dad got sick. So Brian must have gotten COVID from his dad and not the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, her accounting is definitely correct. I guess it doesn't. What it doesn't explain is it still doesn't explain how he got it. You know, in my mind, it still comes back to the fact that I was bringing everything in. So it's not even so much if I personally had it in me, because again, we did not connect. So we were not together. So it wasn't that I breathed it on him, you know, but bringing everything into the house, I worry about, did I grab the wrong lemonade? Did somebody sneeze on this lemonade before I brought it in? And he got it and he picked it up and that's where he got it. You know, I'm not saying she's wrong and we just don't know.
It's funny.
You're not saying she's wrong. She is definitely saying you're wrong.
That's my mom. Yep, that's mom. Yeah. But I can also tell mom also doesn't want this hanging over me. A mother's first job is to always console her child and help her child think the best and whatnot. So I'm not saying that she's saying this just to help me get over it, but of course she's never going to say, even if she knew definitively, she is never going to say, oh, you did it. Never going to say that. She's going to say, Brian, you don't know that you did it. There's nothing to prove it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Let it go. And that's the way it's always going to be.
In the end, of course, they'll never know. His mom can believe what she wants. Brian will believe what he believes. But this is really a classic situation, eventually, with something you can't answer. You think and you think and you think.
It gets to the point where you just can't think about it anymore.
At that point, the only comfort you have is, if you did screw up, it wasn't for lack of trying. Peg said to me that at some point you have to let it go, because you did everything you could. You did everything right. Act 3, bought the farm.